Our newscast thing from the Safe last year aired this day last year.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's been a year?
Yeah, since the news came in and
Holy smokes.
did that. I know, right?
That was a year ago.
Hi, welcome to Enter the Bunker, where we launch you into thriving. Each week we talk about a different virtue that can be used as a building brick to build your own personal bunkers. We share personal stories, as well as tips and tricks to help you thrive instead of survive. So sit down, relax, and enter the bunker.
This week's building brick is wisdom.
Wisdom. How much of it do you have?
I don't have much. Maybe you guys have more than me. Let's hope so.
We were just talking about this before we started.
Yeah.
It seems like you do a number of things throughout your daily life, which is,
I like to call it carelessness.
okay,
But I guess carelessness would be a lack of wisdom from what I'm learning here. So the meaning is having a discerning mind based on experience and mindfulness, making wise decisions based on our deepest intuition.
right,
That's the meaning of wisdom.
right.
So yeah, I just do a lot of silly things like, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but every time I do something that's like, I call it carelessness, I'm always like, come on, Kelly, you knew that. But it's like my brain just doesn't work. For example, just use the stove, but I'll go and I'll touch. So I take a baking sheet out of the stove, or let's say a cast iron pan, because that's more what happens. So I'll take a cast iron pan out of the stove, set it on top, and then I'll go to scoop the food and grab a hold of the cast iron pan, and then my hand's just like burnt.
Ooh,
Because it's silly. Or you turn on your curling iron, and instead of grabbing the handle, you grab the heater part. Like, what is that?
yeah,
That's carelessness
you,
or lack of wisdom.
you can call it carelessness. I don't know if that's a lack of wisdom or,
Well, I know that was hot, so that's knowledge. I know that it's hot.
I think you're just not being mindful.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you're being distracted by something, and so you're not being mindful about what you're doing.
Yeah.
That sounds more like what's going on.
That's definitely it. So there's 3 quotes here. Which one's your favorite?
So, of all the quotes, it's hard for me to say which one's my favorite. But I think
Which one hits home, I guess, maybe.
the one that I feel most challenged with is the second one, which is a smart person knows what to say.
Yeah.
A wise person knows when or not to say it. So, sorry, I totally said that wrong. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
So the one that I feel hits home the most is
Yeah.
the second one, and it says a smart person knows what to say. A wise person knows whether or not to say it.
Right.
Right, and that's by Unknown.
That was probably my favorite too, but I did like the first one. But tell me why that one hits home.
So wisdom. So when it comes to the wisdom in terms of like the things you say,
Yeah.
I've often found myself really challenged in terms of like feeling as though questioning my words, making sure that it's gonna have the right impact, I guess, or it's gonna turn out the way I want it to.
Yeah.
So especially when it comes to dealing with like really complex issues or certain relationships where you know that you're gonna have to say something that you're not sure how they're gonna take it.
Yeah.
That's when you need to use wisdom. And the only way you get wisdom, though, is through knowledge and experience,
Right.
right? So you acquire knowledge, that's one thing, but you increase your wisdom with the experience of how you apply that knowledge,
Right.
right? So the more you get, the more wisdom you acquire. So you get better at how you apply it and how it and whatnot, simply because you've been through it.
Yeah.
And so as you learn that becomes wisdom. And so then as you go forward, it's no longer something you question anymore. It's like, I know that by doing it this way, it's gonna turn out the way, it's the right way to do things, rather than just having the knowledge of something but never actually doing it. you don't know, right? And so then you end up doing things, and then sometimes it doesn't turn out the way you expected. It's like, well, that's one way not to do it. And you're actually acquiring wisdom in that sense too, even if you're doing things wrong.
And you're gaining more knowledge when you, so you're saying you have to have the knowledge, and then wisdom is putting that knowledge into play,
Experience, yep.
experience. But when you get that experience, you gain more knowledge,
I'd say you gain more wisdom rather
more
than
wisdom.
knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was curious about. I also, the first one makes me laugh too, because wisdom is not a product of schooling, but the lifelong attempt to acquire it. That's from Albert Einstein.
Yes.
I only giggle at this one because we had made, back in grade 9, I think it was, we made these cars, wooden cars that had you put a CO2 cartridge in the back, and they had a race at the end once you had it built.
Wow.
Anyways, long story short, I didn't know what to build, so I took one of these weird funky rulers and I just started like drawing this shape out on graph paper. And what I thought it was gonna look like turned out completely different, like the opposite of what I thought it was gonna look like. Anyways, it was this, everyone else had like, they partnered up, and somebody was like a fork and a spoon, and somebody was a piece of cheese, and they just had all these different designs, and I had no clue what to do. Anyways, painted the whole thing white and had all these like colorful Sharpie markers, and I've got the whole class to sign them. And one of the boys wrote, "I'm gonna school you." Just saying, I won, I got first place of my class, but all he's saying is I'm gonna beat you. And the word schooling's in this, so that's why it made me laugh. And so I take it home, and I'm like, yeah, I got first place. And I almost got grounded because mom and dad, they seen I'm gonna school you, and they thought it meant like something sexual or something. And I had to like explain to them, I'm like, no, like this means he's gonna beat me. Like I actually didn't even know what it meant at the time, and Google wasn't the first thing you thought of back then was, oh, I'm gonna Google what this means. Anyways, I almost got grounded. I finally had to them convinced that I'm like, no, it just means like it's gonna beat you. Anyways, I didn't get grounded because everything was good, but that's a funny story of the word school.
Oh my, okay.
That happened in school. So wisdom is not a product of schooling, so kicking butt, right?
Okay.
Isn't that what it means?
That's one way to interpret it.
But of the lifelong attempt to acquire it.
Of kicking butt, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, this could be about anything, I guess. Wisdom is not a product of schooling, but a lifelong attempt to acquire it. So maybe you can explain that to me.
So school isn't a place to acquire wisdom, it's a place to gain knowledge. So if you go to school, the only thing you're really going to
So
get...
this means something completely different than what I'm even thinking.
Right, yes, this is what I'm explaining to you now, right now. I'm explaining this to you, yes.
All right, keep going.
So wisdom is not the product of schooling, meaning like if somebody's gone to like university, you think that and they've learned all these things, they've acquired knowledge.
Yeah.
They don't have the experience, which is what we were talking about earlier.
Right.
So what Einstein goes on to say is, but a lifelong attempt to acquiring it, meaning that, okay, I've got some knowledge, now I got to get some experience,
Yeah.
and that is where I will acquire my wisdom, right?
Okay.
And so this is why, I mean, like, you never hear about the young and wise, you hear about the old and wise, right?
Yes.
You never talk about how
Never.
wise somebody is when
Never.
they're young, right?
Yeah.
It's like you immediately say, like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Even
right?
if somebody's like crazy smart, you say they're smart. You
Yeah.
don't say they're wise.
Yeah, you never say that
No, no.
simply because they just haven't had the chance to have the experience.
So true.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's not like, and I think a little bit of a problem is that I think in today's Insta culture, where everybody is, they can Google everything and then they just immediately think that whatever they read online is just almost like they think they have instant wisdom now. It's like, well, that's what somebody else's experience was, so now it's my experience and I'm going to just say that that's the way it goes, right? Yeah. And then they just, but the problem is that they actually don't know. And then they could turn around and try to mimic these things. And then it's almost like it's not, I don't know what to call that, like processed wisdom, like it's not real,
Yeah.
So that's very common in today's culture, and unfortunately for young people, it doesn't give them a chance to be like, you know what, I do need to get some experience and apply what it is I know so that I can really start to understand, these things, and the more wisdom they have, the more their value increases, like in terms of like their ability to be able to produce certain things or to be able to provide better service or to or the things they create. all these things, whether they're in business, whether they're at a job or anything, right?
Yeah.
So the more experience they get, the greater wisdom they have. So you can take in so much knowledge, you can only take so many classes.
Right.
But then once you actually apply those classes, like I'm sure anybody who's gone to school, they got all these ideas about how it's going to be after they're
Yeah.
done school.
Yeah.
And then they get into work and then they're like, oh my gosh, like they're blown away because all these preconceptions they thought of like, yeah, I know all this stuff are blown away. And now they're stuck having to take in the experience of like, you need to learn, like you're now in a process of applying what you've learned. And from that, you need to gain some wisdom so that you can then be able to actually be more productive.
So what if somebody doesn't go to school, so they don't have a lot of knowledge, but they just jump right in and gain the experience?
So that is, yeah, so they're going in for the experience, they're learning as they go.
Yes.
Right.
They're gaining the knowledge as they go, which is all going to lead to wisdom, though.
Yes, that's true.
Is it?
But they're going to go slower,
Okay.
right? There is something to be said for having a certain skills, like for you to be schooled in a certain area,
Yeah.
and having all kinds of background in terms of like, because a lot of schooling is also practice, right?
Yes.
And it's not necessarily experience, it's just the practice of applying what they're learning. So it's like, I don't know, like if you're using software or something like that, somebody who's exposed to, say, I don't know, Photoshop,
Yeah.
right? A lot of people, like anybody, a teenager can pick up Photoshop and start to use it and
Yeah.
start to learn it, right? And gain some knowledge from that. But then actually taking what they know in terms of like, okay, this is where I go to be able to do the paint function or something. Then it's a matter of, okay, how's that applied? How's that applied with wisdom, right? So
Right.
like, for example, a lot of people see like logos all around them and they're just like, oh, I can create a logo.
Yeah.
But then it's like, how much do you know about that, right? Like how
Yeah.
many times have you done that
Yeah.
to know what it is that makes that a logo that actually is effective and actually produces, the kind of like branding that matters, right? So this is the difference between wisdom and knowledge, right? So Einstein knew what he was talking about clearly here. So
That doesn't surprise me. So there's a Greek philosopher, Aristotle. Aristotle, is that how I say that?
yes,
That's right?
Aristotle, that's right.
Oh! Pretty pumped about that. He believed that practical wisdom was the path to making every right decision, and that virtue was it was the virtue that made all the other virtues possible.
Yes.
I guess, because you gotta have your wisdom to. I don't know how that works.
So take, for example, all the building bricks that we talk about.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's very easy for us to be conveying that as knowledge, right?
Right.
So people are learning about the building bricks and how they apply and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But if everybody just takes building bricks and just goes, yeah, so I know all about what, I know all about what wisdom is. I know all about what open-mindedness is. I know all about what tact is.
Thoughtfulness.
Right? I know so I know all these things.
Yeah.
But then they never actually apply it, right? So they
Right.
don't actually use it in practical ways in their lives. Then they don't gain any wisdom, meaning that the things that they know actually just kind of are meaningless. They don't actually produce any results without actually applying them in ways that make sense and then gain the wisdom from that. And
Right.
so what Aristotle is saying is that you need to have the wisdom that comes from knowledge and experience together to produce like the right type of practical decisions.
So does wisdom, how do I word this? Does wisdom make your knowledge better?
Does wisdom make your knowledge better? I guess you could say wisdom helps you to
Use your knowledge.
apply your knowledge better.
Okay.
Yes.
This is
So-
kind of confusing in my brain, but I'm starting to get it a little.
Okay.
Yeah. I was like, I thought I knew it, and then as we got talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I do.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. So wisdom is the ability to judge and discern what is right, true, and lasting, not to be confused with knowledge, which is the gaining of information. Wisdom is applied to knowledge to make sound decisions. Exactly what we were just talking about.
Boom, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. You can still make poor decisions with all the necessary information, though. Have you ever had that happen?
All the
Your
time.
face, you're like, pfft.
Of course.
Give me an example. If you can think of one.
A decision, make poor decisions with all the necessary information.
So many things could make that happen. Like you could be greedy and just make it poorful because you have all the knowledge, but maybe you want something all to yourself, or you could be too thoughtful because you don't. You know what I mean? There could be so many things that could make you do that. But I think that's all with practicing the building bricks. Like as you practice them all.
That is where it doesn't matter how much information you have.
Yeah.
You start to then be able to make better decisions.
Yeah.
Because, again, when you have knowledge alone, you don't have everything you need to be able to make good decisions.
Right.
You need to be able to have the experience that goes with it.
Yeah.
And then from that, you gain the wisdom that leads to better choices. But of course, you can still make poor decisions when you have all the information that's necessary. I think because, I'm trying to think of an example. It's really hard to come up with one.
Yeah, that is. I know. I've been trying to rack my brain.
I think it's just little things, and maybe not all the information, but enough information that you think you're making the right decision, but you're not.
Yeah.
Because you're walking into this for the first time. Okay, we'll talk about it. When the big P started, right?
The big P.
The P? What have we been going through for the past 19 months?
I don't know.
So when the lockdown started.
Yeah, there we go. That's better.
Go there.
Yeah.
So when the lockdown started,
Yeah.
right? Now, frankly, all the information we had was just kind of like what we could work with, right? But there wasn't necessarily all the information, but we had enough that we had to make a decision about which way we're going to go, right? So based on all the decision that I could gather, I had to make a decision whether we were going to shut down everything and who is going to get we ended up having to lay off a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot.
And we ended up having to keep just a few people to keep things running and things like this, right? So that was all, that was a situation where, guess what? We've never been introduced with that kind of situation ever, right?
Never.
I have no reference whatsoever. Like I can look back in the past, there's nothing to look at. There's no, this is a first time. So I'm walking in the dark. I might have all the necessary information in front of me, but I have no experience, which means that my possibility for making a wise decision is up in the air, right? So now I'm relying on the past knowledge and my past experiences to try to guide me in that darkness. And that's a good information of where you can still make poor decisions even when you have all the information in front of you, right? So even though there was all this information in terms of what's happening, I still didn't have I still didn't have an idea in terms of what would be the correct, decision, right? Luckily enough, I think overall I made the right decision.
Yes, I was just gonna ask that.
I don't think that if I look back and I
think we legally had to shut down, didn't we?
Well, it was a mandate. It wasn't necessarily legal, but but the fact is that there was certain factors in terms of what we were going to do with the staff and what we were going to do with all these other things. So these were things that had to be worked out. And looking back, I can't imagine us doing something differently that would have been any better in that circumstance, right? So now as we go further, though, we've got more information to work from. We've now got a lot more wisdom because we've been through this experience for 19 months now, right? 2 weeks to flatten the curve, it started with.
And counting.
But then we went way past 2 weeks, and now we're into months, and so now we can make better decisions, right? So now it's okay, we've got a lot more experience in this now. We know how, what to expect. So it's easier to make better quality decisions in that kind of environment because we got the knowledge and because we got the experience, and now we got the wisdom, right?
Yeah.
So that becomes the powerful combination. That's the most obvious thing that comes to mind in terms of a time when I had all the information, didn't have any of the wisdom.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And there was a good possibility of making a poor decision, although I didn't make a poor I don't think that it could have gone any other way. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a sad decision, but
it was. I know that with our event staff, we did give them the opportunity though to work maintenance, so that way they didn't have to lose their jobs if they didn't want to. So
That's right.
that was really, I think that was probably a great part of your decision as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this might throw a wrench in what you had just mentioned. So what if some of the knowledge that you're gaining you don't agree with or believe in or think it's fake, or is that knowledge to you then? Not you per se, but a person.
I don't understand what you mean.
I know.
Can you rephrase that?
Yeah, I will try my best. Okay, so you've gained all of this. So we're going to stick to the big P because we might as well. So you've gained all this knowledge
Okay.
from news channels.
Okay.
And you gained all the knowledge, and you don't necessarily agree with it all, or you don't believe it, or you don't, I don't know, we'll go from there. How do you know what's the right knowledge? Because you see this thing, you see one thing, and then you see the other thing. How do you know which one's the right knowledge to take and put into the experience to gain the wisdom?
So that comes from past wisdom.
Okay.
So past experiences.
Past experiences.
Right.
Okay.
So if you're taking, for example, when we learn about something that, like we just learned about something that happened in the news,
Yes.
right? Or we're being told about something, going on, or we've
Yeah.
learned about there's a new development and things
Yeah.
like this. So these are pieces of information, right? These are pieces of knowledge, I guess.
Yeah.
And then what we do then is we go back into our past, and it's like from all our accumulated like information, experience, and whatnot,
Okay.
taking the wisdom from that and applying it as this happens with everybody. Everybody
Oh,
has
yeah.
their own
Oh,
filter
yeah.
in terms of how much wisdom they can apply to what they've just learned.
Okay.
So if there's no experience going forward, there's experience of the past. So you, in this situation what you're talking about, what if you learn something, and what's happening is that when you're learning these new things, you're applying your wisdom from the past. So let's take for example,
Yep.
this is a good example actually,
Okay.
because I was actually thinking about this the other day, how it's interesting. But because I talked about the book Outliers,
Yes.
right? And in that book, it talks about how success doesn't come from, self-made people. It comes from the environment they're raised in.
Right.
And that they're given certain environments, and in those ideal environments, and in the it's not just necessarily the environment, but it's like they're in the right place at the right time,
Yeah.
and they've got the right environment, and that is what creates the success that they have, right?
Yeah.
So I thought about, I after learning that, I've just been kind of like trying to apply that to my own life, because previous to understanding this idea of it depends on your environment that you became successful,
Yeah.
I always thought that, I grew to where I am now against all odds. Like I was like the typical story of, kid who came from nothing to suddenly, doing a lot of things. So I kept on replaying in my mind, like, okay, so what was it about my environment that made it so that I had gained, like I had gone further than where I came from, right? What was it that did that? And I started replaying things that had to do with, like my father,
Yeah.
right? So my father suffered from mental illness, okay? And we had dealings with the health system
Yeah.
all our lives,
Right.
right? And went through multiple medications his entire life, right? So then I started to think about how I'm responding. So I started to think about how it was that I was thinking about all the things I was receiving regarding what's going on here
Right.
with the big P, right?
Yeah.
And why is it that if I learn about something that I don't take it at face value, I think about all the things I know from my past that makes me think about how I should be looking at what's in front of me.
Okay.
Okay, so for example, I've had a lifetime of experience from when I was a child all the way up until my dad died,
Yeah.
where the medical system treated him a certain way, where drug companies kept introducing new medications, where all these things were continually happening to the point where it created a distrust in me of the system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's what my knowledge and my experience of a lifetime, right, taught me.
Right.
Now, a lot of people don't have that experience.
No.
A lot of people don't have that knowledge. So why is it that, and so then I started to think about how you know, like what you're talking about. So what happens when you read about something and it's a piece of knowledge, but you don't necessarily believe it? It's because you have that filter, depending on where you're coming from, that applies that wisdom from the past. So in my case, right,
Yep.
I start to get all this kind of information about the pharmaceutical companies
Right.
and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And I immediately have a lifetime of experience to reference about, oh, this is how they actually work, right? And so this is what you can expect, you know? So it's a different experience though, right?
Right.
Versus somebody who might have never had that experience. Maybe they just like broke an ankle or
Do
something.
you think one bad experience could lead to the same thoughts?
No, I don't think one bad experience can lead to those same thoughts. I think one bad experience is kind of like, well, that was just one bad experience, and then it's kind of like, it happened once, so maybe it was just that one time because there's all these other times that were good. But then when you keep having the same experience, when you keep coming up with the same information,
Yeah, like
then,
you said, lifetime.
yeah, then it turns into like, you know what, this is, wisdom is saying what wisdom is saying is that you should be more questioning about what things are going on. You should understand that the way things work aren't necessarily always in your best interest.
Right.
So these are the things that I got from my experience over a lifetime of that knowledge and experience dealing with the medical establishment, right? So from a very personal experience, right? Not necessarily on me, but on my father, and having to be part of that constantly, right? So that's just one example of the kinds of things that people gain throughout their life, right? There's that filter of wisdom that gets applied to whatever knowledge they get, and sometimes that changes the way that it gets incorporated into how we think of things, or how we're going to even interpret the information that we receive. Right.
Yeah.
So you can see on social media there can be debates going on, and for some people they are so set in what they believe that because there's nothing else to because all of us are in different worlds.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Every person has their own world. So when people get onto social media over a single issue, it's like worlds collide.
Yeah.
Right? And just,
Great way of putting it.
And so but then there's other ways and it all depends again on people's past experiences, right? So you have the people who might have come from a background like mine that are just like, no, you should question everything, and you should be critical of things, and you should really, dig into things, and don't just take things at face value. And then you have others who are just like, trust the scientists, trust the experts, and make sure, and there's no reason you should question them. And so that's just some people's experience, right? And that's just that's what some people's, we'll call it, their wisdom brick is telling them.
Do you
right?
think the rest of your family gained the same knowledge?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'd say probably, I would say that,
I guess any part of the family that knew what was even going on or anything like that.
Well, it's interesting because I think that maybe because I was so young, I might have seen it through different eyes. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas, because it was like my whole life, right? Like my entire life, that's all I knew, right?
Yeah.
Like I didn't necessarily, and I always said that I never really knew my father.
Yeah.
All I knew was the illness.
Yeah.
Right. So the thing about my mother, for example.
Yes.
Right. She actually remembers what he was like before he was ill.
Right.
And so that's what always kept her holding on. But she went through the same experiences I did, and she had the same frustrations at times.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think she ever developed the same kind of, we'll call it distrust of the system that I did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So to the point where I'm more critical of things.
Yeah.
I'm gonna question things, and I'm gonna dig deeper than she would on something, right? Or any of my extended family, who of course all of them go through it, right? It's not just the immediate family that goes through issues like that. It's like the whole family gets involved, because everybody has to have their time on it, right?
Yeah.
so that's just the way families go.
Yeah.
but it's the problem is that everybody has, the different experience at different times of their lives. So the earlier on, like that, I think that because my experience was earlier on, it then became a part of my value hierarchy, right, from a very young age. Whereas, a lot of my family came from a place where it was different, where it was just like, no, you should just do what the doctor tells you to do. You should just do, like this is their advice. You should follow it. They're trying to do what's best for you, and that's all there is to it. There's nothing more to think about. But then I heard the same thing, and then I'd see the results, and then we're just going through the same thing over again, and I'm just like, no, that's not what's happening here. So there's something else, and it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And when something doesn't add up, that means something's not right, something's not true.
Yeah.
Right. So so you got to keep looking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Keep gaining that knowledge.
So that you have more wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So join us for part 2 of wisdom on how to use wisdom.
Part 2.
Thank you for listening to Enter the Bunker. Make sure to follow us on Instagram where you can share your story and also look at behind the scenes of how we make our podcast. You can watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube by simply searching Enter the Bunker. Tune in next time as we launch into thriving.